Well, good morning, Soflo Church. How y'all doing? Yeah. Hey, man, I am honored to be here with you guys. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Heath, and I am one of the pastors on staff at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And I've had the privilege of serving there for about 8 years now. Today, I brought with me my wife, Jennifer. We've been married for 18 years. Got my two daughters, Hope, who is 11, and Elsie, who's 6. And so we're pumped. I mean, we get to take a beach vacation and be here and hang out with you guys, and it is sweet. So we are excited by this. One thing you need to know about me that you probably will find out before the end of this service is this. Before I had daughters, I used to never cry. I never cried. My wife will tell you, first 5 years of our marriage, hardly shed a tear. We had our oldest daughter, now I cry all the time. I cry at commercials, I cry during movies and songs, I cry when meat goes on sale, I can cry at anything. And so if I cry today, just know that's who I am, it's what I do. And today, I'm excited to be with you because we're continuing in a series you guys have been walking through called Summer in the Psalms. And today I want to look at Psalm 77, and if that sounds familiar to you, it should. Because when Pastor Jamie and I started having this conversation about me coming here to speak, I asked him, I said, hey, what Psalms are other people doing, and how do I make sure I don't duplicate them? And he said, you know what, don't worry about it, just pick one. And I thought, man, that sounds great. There's a lot of Psalms. Surely no one else will pick the same Psalm I'm going to preach on, right? And so each week I've been watching your all's messages, and I've been excited about the preachers you guys have had here, and man, the things they've been talking about, and it was all good. None of them picked my Psalm until 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I'm watching and I'm driving down the road in my truck going to kayak, and suddenly a guy comes up on the screen and he says, my name's Jack and I'm from Mosaic Church in Baltimore, and today we're going to talk about Psalm 77. And I'm like, ugh. And it wasn't just that he was preaching my psalm. It's that he was young and he was taller than me and he had good hair and he talked good and he did all the right things. He was like the Matthew McConaughey of Maryland. And I was like, I hope this is a really bad sermon. But it wasn't. It was good. And I'm driving and I find myself nodding my head along with some of the points. He's talking about rejoicing in prayer. And my buddy TC says this. He says, hey, in black church, we talk to you or we amen. He says, in white church, you guys moo. And I was like, I don't know what he means. But I was in the truck and I heard Jack talking. I was like, that's good. And I was like, I'm mooing. I think this is what TC means. And so today we're going to look at Psalm 77. We're going to take a different approach to it, though. We're going to look at Psalm 77, and we're going to ask the question, what can we learn from that about where to take shelter during the storms of our lives? And I feel uniquely equipped to talk about storms. You see, in 1985, I was born in Tampa during Hurricane Elena. In 1992, I lived in Daytona during Hurricane Andrew. In 1996, the small town that I lived in Hillview, Kentucky, was destroyed by an EF4 tornado. In 2006, my wife and Jennifer and I, we were on our honeymoon in New Smyrna Beach when Tropical Storm Alberto came through. And then in 2008, the remnants of Hurricane Ike made their way all the way to Kentucky, and we had the largest windstorm in the history of the state. And just 6 months later, in 2009, the largest ice storm in the history of the state of Kentucky. Y'all, I've been through some storms. Not just that, when I went to college at Western Kentucky University, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was doing lawn care and landscaping. I was managing a restaurant. I was repossessing cars. Anything I could do to make $1, I was doing. And so I decided I would take a meteorology class. And here's what I learned in meteorology. I learned there's different types of storms. The first type of storm is what's called a single-cell thunderstorm. It's a single cell that grows, gets to a certain point, and then dies off. You might hear this called like a pop-up storm. And usually you get these after the heat of the day, and with these storms, there will be some rain, and it's inconvenient, but it's not dangerous. The next type is what's called a multi-cell thunderstorm. This is where multiple single-cell storms come up together. And with these, you usually get some heavy rain, sometimes some flooding. And what can happen sometimes is those storms, those multi-cell storms, will produce little tails. They call this a training effect. It creates like a train. And that means that the rain and the precipitation goes on and on. This can cause heavy flash flooding with the downpours and sometimes extreme wind gusts. The third type is what's called a squall line thunderstorm. This type is fast moving and it can go hundreds of miles. And as it moves, it grows in intensity. It gets stronger and stronger. And with these, you can have hail, you can have tornadoes, you can have heavy rain. The most dangerous of these is the straight line winds. You know that if it's a squall line thunderstorm, there's more likely to be damage. And the last type of storm is the king of all thunderstorms. It's called a supercell thunderstorm. And a supercell thunderstorm has all types of precipitation with it. And it has what's called a rotating updraft, which means this: it's more likely to spawn multiple tornadoes at once. If you get a supercell thunderstorm, you know it's going to be devastating to you and the community around you. And I bet if you stopped this morning and you thought about the storms in your life, the personal storms you've experienced, you could probably divide them up into those similar categories. Like, some of them are just like pop-up storms. They come up quickly and they go away, and they're definitely inconvenient, but they're not devastating. But then others of them, they're like supercells. When you encounter one of those, it feels like you're being hit from all sides and you can't escape it. With it comes destruction and complete devastation. And for some of you, maybe the storms you face today are things like the daily battle with anxiety and depression. Each day you wake up and the thoughts begin ruminating in your head and you can't seem to escape them. And it's like storm after storm after storm that keeps coming that you're just longing for a little bit of respite from. For some of you, maybe you thought you'd be married by now, or at least in a committed relationship, and yet what you're watching is all the people around you are getting married, and yet you find yourself without any prospects or even a date. Seems like a pretty big storm. Maybe it's the loss of a job, or it's the promotion you didn't get. Maybe it's the team you didn't make, or the school you didn't get into, or it's drama within your friend group. Maybe it's the new diagnosis, or it's the battle with infertility. Maybe it's a broken relationship. I met a young lady at the beach yesterday. Her name was Brenda. Brenda is in an inpatient drug treatment facility here in Palm Beach, and she shared with me that her daily battle is the battle with the craving for fentanyl. And she said, every single day I have to fight to not go back to the thing that my body craves. Every day it's a storm. You see, we all walk through storms. So the question we need to ask is this: where do we find shelter during these storms? So if you got your Bible or Bible app, I want to invite you to open it up. Psalm 77 is where we're going to be today. Psalm 77. And Psalm 77 is what's known as a psalm of lament. Lament means this: it means to express deep sorrow, grief, or despair. Old Testament scholars estimate that 2/3 of all the psalms in the Bible are actually psalms of lament. And in the Old Testament, there's an entire book called Lamentations, which is literally a book of lament. So if the Bible spends that much time talking about lamenting, we should probably understand how to do it too. And some background for Psalm 77, it's written by a man named Asaph. We don't know a lot about Asaph. Here's what we know. Asaph is a Levite worshiper, which means he's like a singer and songwriter. We also know that he wrote around 11 chapters of the book of Psalms, and most of his writing is about God's judgment against the people of Israel. Most of his writing is about when God's people are carried off into exile and the pain that causes him. And that's where we find Asaph today. Here's how he starts Psalm 77. He says, I cry out to God. Yes, I shout. Oh, that the Lord would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long I prayed and I lifted my hands toward heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed to even pray. So Asaph here is crying out to God, but he doesn't feel like God is listening. And he's taking all the right steps, right? I mean, he's praying, he's seeking the Lord, and yet God feels distant from him. Asaph is in a storm. And this brings me to the question that I often have to wrestle with, and I want all of us to wrestle with this morning. And it's this: when the storms of life come, where do I take shelter? When the storms of life come, where do I take shelter? Because all of us take shelter somewhere. Like, some of us take shelter in our own abilities or our productivity. We think if I just try harder and do more, if I just put forth more effort, then I can fix this. We find our value in what we produce and what we can achieve, and we think if we just achieve that, then all these things will go away. For some of us, we take shelter in our mental strength. We think if I just ignore it, or if I just push it down, if I don't let people know it's bothering me, then in reality, it won't bother me. Some of us take shelter in our vices. We try to numb it with alcohol or drugs. We try to numb it with binge watching TV or food. Sometimes we try to numb it with social media or anything to numb our mind. I say this often, if you want to know where you turn for shelter, look at your browsing history. It'll tell you a lot. Some of us take shelter in isolation. We withdraw. We go to ourselves and we think, hey, if I just pull away, if I get on my own, then I won't hurt anyone else with what I'm experiencing. But that leads us to being depressed, overwhelmed. It's crippling. And here's the crazy thing. Each of these shelters will serve us well for a short period of time. But they can never hold up. They weren't meant to. It's like trying to fight hurricane force winds with a Temu umbrella, right? Like it might protect you for just a short time, but it ain't gonna hold up. So what do? Where do we go? Notice what Asaph does. He starts by acknowledging what's really going on with him. He says this, he says, I moan, overwhelmed with longing for help. He says, God, listen, I know you're powerful. I know you can fix this, but God, right now, I know that you won't for some reason. You're not showing up. You're not doing what I believe you can do. And he says, at this point, I'm not even sleeping. I'm too distressed to even pray. He's overwhelmed. But Asaph continues to take his concerns to the Lord. He's praying through writing. He's sharing with God what it is he's feeling and what it is he's experiencing. And he's being raw and real. And this brings me to the first step on our path to shelter, and that is we have to open up. By open up, I mean this. We have to take our complaints to God. And you know, oftentimes I wonder if we don't take our complaints to God because we think we're not allowed to. Like, we think if you begin to question God, then he's going to punish you. We think that God doesn't want to hear our complaints. He only wants to hear the good things from us, but that's not the way it works. You know, sometimes I wonder if we don't take our complaints to God because we're just not that comfortable praying, if we're really honest. Like, we think we have to have eloquent words and deep theological points to speak to our Heavenly Father, and if we can't do that, if we can't pray like someone who's here on stage, then we probably shouldn't pray to him. You know, I saw this video this week that reminded me of how I want to pray. Watch with me.
Oh God, just heal my body, oh God. Just bless my soul right in a minute, oh God. Oh God, bless my soul and heal my sickness. Oh God, take my sickness away. Oh God, in Jesus' name, amen, oh God.
Amen.
Here's the part of that video you don't get to see. His mama goes, hey, that's great, but you were supposed to be blessing your food. Right, I love it. Like, he gets so into his prayer. He's so deep in his prayer, just praying to God about his sickness and what he's feeling, that he forgets what he's even praying about. And that's how I want to pray, right? I want to pray in power like that, just proclaiming boldly to God everything that I'm experiencing and feeling. But sometimes what happens is I feel more like Will Ferrell's character in Talladega Nights, right? I'm like Ricky Bobby praying to the dear Lord, baby Jesus. And if you don't get that reference right now, you take out your phone and you go to Netflix and you add that to your wish list, because that is an incredible movie. It won't make you more like Jesus, but it'll make you laugh. It's good, all right? So it's good stuff. And sometimes what we need to learn from Asaph is that no matter what we're feeling, we can carry it to God. That he's big enough to receive it. All of it. No matter how raw and real, he just wants to have a conversation with you. And that's why Peter tells us in 1 Peter 5:7, he says, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. He wants to receive those things. He wants to hear from his children. He wants to take on your worries and your cares, and he wants you to bring them to him. I think that's why Jesus tells this parable in Luke 18, what's called the parable of the persistent widow. It's about this widow who keeps coming to this judge. And daily she's begging this judge for justice. And over again, she begs and begs until finally the judge relents and gives in and gives her what she's been asking for. And Jesus summarizes it this way, Luke 18. He says, learn a lesson from this unjust judge. Even he rendered a just decision in the end. So don't you think God will surely give justice to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? Notice this. Jesus doesn't say, stop asking God and just have faith. He doesn't say that. Instead, what he says is, keep asking because you have faith. He says your faith should get you to take all those things to God. Your faith should get you to make requests of God. That's part of having faith in who he is and what he can do. And that's exactly what Asaph does next. He begins to make requests of God. Here's what he says. He says, I think of the good old days long since ended, when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I search my soul and I ponder the difference now. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And I said, this is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me. Notice what Asaph's doing here. He's reminding himself of God's promises, but he's stating how those promises don't seem to be coming true in his life. He says, God, I know these things are true about you, but my situation where I find myself right now, those things don't seem true. He says, God, listen, I know that you're kind. I know you're gracious. I know your love is unfailing. I know your promises are always true. But God, in the midst of the storm, would you give me eyes to see those things? Because I'm not seeing them right this moment. And that brings me to the second step on our path to shelter. After you open up, you need to speak up. You got to ask God boldly. Ask him for justice. Ask him to be who he says he is, and ask him to help you see those things. And this is an important step because understand this, storms will often make us question what we've always known with certainty. Storms will make us question what we've always known with certainty. It's like this. Have you ever been driving down a familiar road? Maybe one you travel every day to work or to school or to Publix. And it's a road you know really well. But as you're driving, all of a sudden a heavy downpour comes. And you turn your windshield wipers on, but the rain is so strong that the windshield wipers don't seem to be making a difference. And you lean forward closer to the window so that you can get a better view, and yet you just can't see the things you could normally see. And all of a sudden, the road that has been so familiar in the past, one you've traveled hundreds or thousands of times, seems very unfamiliar. Like you know there's a stoplight ahead, but you can't see the stoplight anymore. Or you know there's a turn coming, but you can't find your turn. See, the road hasn't changed, but your perspective has due to the storm you find yourself in. Hear the rain? See, it's God working. God's moving right now. That's what it's like in our spiritual journey, y'all. Like we experience hardship, we encounter a storm, and the promises of God that we've always known to be true suddenly don't seem so sure anymore. And when this happens, we follow Asaph's lead and we take it to God. We ask him to be true to his promises, to the characteristics of his person that we know to be true. And we ask God to give us eyes to see things even in the midst of the storm. So then Asaph continues. He says, but then I recall all you've done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. Oh God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeem your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. Notice verse 11 starts with the word but. Important study tip for Psalms of Lament. In every Psalm of Lament, when reading it, there's a turning point. It's the point where it moves from the writer complaining to God and boldly making requests of God to suddenly reminding themselves of who God is and what God's done. And so they always use the word but or yet. So you look for one of those two words. And what the writer's saying is this: God, everything I just said is true, but yet everything I'm about to say, I also know to be true. That's what Asaph's doing here. He makes the turn and he begins to remind himself of God's faithfulness. He begins to remind himself of times that God has shown up in the past. If you remember when we started, I told you that Asaph writes about the exile of the people of Israel. He's talking about them being carried off. And most writers think that that's what Asaph is writing about here during the first 10 verses. But in verse 11, he's going to start talking about a time in the past when God redeemed his people, a time when God showed up and he was good and he was faithful. And he's going to remind himself that God can do that again. My friend Kyle says it this way. He says, at this point is where Asaph stops talking to God about his problems and instead talks to his problems about God. He's going to stop talking to God about his problems. He's going to start talking to his problems about who God is and what God does. And so starting in verse 77, he says, when the Red Sea saw you, O God, its waters looked and trembled. The sea quaked to its very depth. The clouds poured down rain. The thunder rumbled in the sky. Your arrows of lightning flashed. Your thunder roared from a whirlwind. The lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along that road like a flock of sheep, with Moses and Aaron as their shepherds. So Asaph chooses to remind himself of the greatest deliverance he can remember, a time when God showed up and was faithful to his people and helped his entire people be set free. He reminds himself of when Israel was set free from slavery in Egypt. And if you remember this story, here's what happens. God's people, the nation of Israel, is enslaved in Egypt. And God sends Moses to Pharaoh, and he says, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses continues to go, but every time he shows up, Pharaoh says no. And God sends a plague on the people of Egypt. And finally, God gets tired of all of it. He says, okay, I'm going to send the worst plague of all. I'm going to send the death of the firstborn son. And it's after the death of the firstborn son of all the people of Egypt that Pharaoh finally says, okay, you can leave. Go now. And Moses begins to lead the people out, headed toward the promised land. But as they get close to the Red Sea, something happens and Pharaoh changes his mind. And so he sends the Egyptian army and he says, bring them back. And so if you can picture, all of a sudden, all this large group of people, the people of Israel are together and they're looking at the Red Sea. There's no bridge. It's too deep to cross. And they turn and look behind them and what they see is the Egyptian army. And they begin to think to themselves, we should have never left. Why would God bring us here this far to send us back into slavery? Why would God punish us like this? And they begin to doubt and they begin to question. But then God does the unbelievable. And he parts the waters and creates dry ground where the people of Israel are able to pass through and escape the Egyptian army. It's a great story of God's power and his deliverance. And it's in this story that Asaph finds hope. See, he can choose to doubt in this situation or he can choose faith. And he has to decide in this moment, which one am I going to choose? And he says, you know what, God, if you were faithful then I can trust that you're going to be faithful now. He chooses faith. He believes that God will make a way even when no way seems possible. And can I be honest for just a second? I think this might be the hardest part of lament. Because oftentimes we find ourselves in situations that just don't seem that hopeful. Like when we're in the storm, it's hard to look and choose faith when everything around us seems so hopeless. We look around like the Israelites and we have no idea where we're going or what we're going to do. And we begin to think to ourselves, what good can God do with this? We think, if God cares, why hasn't he done something? Maybe we think to ourselves, you know what? God doesn't care about me. He's not even listening anymore. Some of us begin to feel shame and we think this is God's way of punishing me for things I've done in the past. See, people told me God was loving, but I knew at some point he was going to get revenge. And the reality is, Asaph likely felt all these things, but he reaches the point where he has to decide, am I going to choose doubt, or am I going to choose faith? And this gets us to the third step on the path to shelter. And that is, after you open up and speak up, you got to look up. You got to look for God. You got to look for his faithfulness. And that's what Asaph does. He reminds himself of how God made a way when there wasn't one. How he took a situation that was full of uncertainty and how God showed up for his people in the midst of the uncertainty. He uses God's faithfulness in the past to remind him that God will be faithful now and in the future. And I wonder sometimes if we've seen God be faithful many times in our life, but we just don't take time to stop and reflect on it. Right? Like we all live busy lives. We got a lot of things going on and we're constantly being told you got to plan for the future. Right? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do next week or next month or next year? How are you saving? How are you preparing? We're always thinking about the future, but we often don't take time to stop and reflect on the past. I mean, that's true for me. Listen, when I began to write this sermon, when I felt like God gave me Psalm 77, I thought he gave me this to preach on for you. Like I thought God was telling me, hey, the people of Soflo Church, they need to hear this message on Lament because they're going through storms. But what I didn't know was that God was actually giving me this message because he was preparing me for what was about to happen in my life. You see, as I began to write this message, all of a sudden it became wave after wave of storm. I started to write the message and my wife's mom was diagnosed with leukemia. And all of a sudden my wife had to start taking regular trips down to visit her mom, to get her to doctor's appointments and to help her with things around the house. 2 weeks later, while she was visiting her mom, someone rear-ended her car and totaled it, leaving her stranded, leaving us without a vehicle. A week later, we were supposed to go on an anniversary trip together. We're on an anniversary trip. My mom and my two girls are at home when they call me and say, hey, we have no air conditioning. The air conditioner went out. And we're in California, and I'm trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to get this fixed. It's over 100 degrees in Louisville at that time, and I'm thinking, Lord, what are you doing? I get home. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a teenage daughter of a 48-year-old member of our church. He's a father of 3. She called me and she said, Heath, we just found my dad unconscious in the floor. Could you get over here? And I drove as fast as I could to get there, but by the time I got there, he had passed. And I sit on the couch with him, or with his wife and his 3 kids, while his body's still laying in another room, and they wept. And they asked a lot of questions of God. And if I can be honest, so did I. I mean, this guy had invested in so many people. Hundreds of people at our church have been impacted by him. He helped launch our campus. He was this core member, and I remember thinking, God, how can you possibly be done with him? With all the work that he's done, he's been so faithful to your kingdom. How can this be? I had a lot of questions. And just 1 week later, my grandfather went in for a routine procedure in Daytona. He got out of his routine procedure. Everything was going good. They were talking about sending him home. And within 72 hours, his body began to shut down and he passed. And it was as these waves of heavy storms continued to roll in that I began to apply this pathway to shelter. And if I can be honest, early on, it was really easy. It was easy just to complain to God and to ask boldly and choose faith. But as the storms got heavier, as they kept coming, it got harder and harder. The pathway wasn't as clear. It wasn't as simple as I had laid out for you in this message. It wasn't as simple as I thought it was going to be. But finally, I took time to stop and reflect. To reflect on how God had been faithful in my life, how he'd shown up over and over again. I just had to stop and pause for a minute. I had to be reminded of my freshman year of high school when my mom and dad got divorced. And my mom moved us 2 hours away from the town I grew up in to be closer to her family. And y'all, when I got there, I was an outsider. I didn't know anybody. And I had left my friends and my community, and it was lonely, and it was isolating, and I was overwhelmed. It was rough. But it's because we moved that I wound up at Western Kentucky University. And it's at Western Kentucky University that I met a beautiful girl named Jennifer who later became my wife. And so while I didn't understand it then, listen, if I hadn't moved, then I wouldn't have been at Western, which means I wouldn't have met her. One of the best things that ever happened to me. God was faithful. I thought about how 3 years into my marriage, Jennifer found out that I was battling an addiction that I'd been hiding from her. She had no idea. And I remember the tears and the overwhelmedness that she felt in that moment. I remember how sad she was. I remember thinking, what am I doing as a husband? She had every reason to leave, and she probably should have. But God gave her courage and wisdom, and she stayed. And it's because she stayed that God redeemed me as a man and as a husband, and he redeemed my marriage. And it's because of him that I'm here today. God was faithful. I thought about how we battled infertility for 2 years. How we would go to these baby showers and we want to celebrate with those people. We go home mourning for ourselves. I thought about how my wife would take a pregnancy test and then she would come back after taking a pregnancy test and we would sit and cry for hours thinking, God, we would be great parents. Why won't you let us? But then I was reminded about how God put a doctor in our life. And this doctor not only knew what we needed, but helped us in the process. And it's because of the doctor and the medication that doctor knew about that we have 2 daughters today. God was faithful. I thought about recently. Jennifer and I both made career changes. Me from sales into being a pastor, which is a total different change. And her from the career field she was in into another. And I thought about all the uncertainty we felt. How are we going to afford this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work? And if I could be really honest, on paper, none of it made sense. My own grandmother told me when I told her I was going to change jobs, she said, you're an idiot. But we knew it was what God was calling us to. And we said yes. And somehow, even when the numbers didn't work out, even when we couldn't see it, God always provided. And now we are both more fulfilled than we've ever been in any career. God was faithful. And listen, understand this. Stopping to reflect doesn't make the storm go away. Storms are still real and they're still there. However, what it does do is it reminds you of storms you survived in the past and it gives you confidence that God will show up in the midst of this one too. And so here's what I want to encourage you to do this week. I want to encourage you to stop and reflect on his faithfulness. Jennifer's a morning journaler. If you get up in the morning and you like to journal, here's what I want to challenge you to do. Stop and in your journal this week, once a day, in the morning, you just sit down and you write down one time that God has held true to a promise to you. Just write it down. I'm not a journaler. I'm a short notes on my phone guy. If that's you, here's what I want to encourage you to do. This week, once a day, stop in the morning, first thing. Pull up a note and type up one time that God provided a way when you didn't think it was possible. We love to do this with our kids. We like to sit around the table and talk about times when God put people in our lives at just the right moment. When we were feeling hopeless and yet God gave us hope. We love to talk about those things. Maybe you just need to tell somebody else about God's faithfulness. How you remind yourself isn't nearly as important as actually stopping to be reminded. And I don't know every situation in this room, but I would bet many of you find yourself in a storm right now. There's something in your life that feels heavy. It's a burden that you're carrying. So what if you made the decision today to stop taking shelter in yourself or in the things of this world, but instead take the path to shelter in God? Like to lament to him, to bring your complaints to him, to ask boldly, and to choose faith. Right now, I'm choosing to be faithful that roof's not gonna collapse right there because I don't know what's happening behind me, but I hear water pouring. Fix it, Jesus. That's where I'm at. If you stopped to reflect, if you stopped to lament and to find shelter in God, how might that change your relationships? How might it change your spiritual health? How might it change your mental health? How might it change your journey with Jesus? How might it give you rest for your mind and for your soul? Psalm 91, David says this. He says, those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. So open up, speak up, look up, and watch how the Lord shows up. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for the truth that you are always with us, that you're with us in the storm, and that you are Lord of all things, God. You are Lord of the storms of our life. God, you are Lord of the challenges we experience. God, you are the Lord of the hardships that we walk through. And you tell us in Scripture that you are a friend, you are a comforter, that you are an advocate, that you are a counselor. And God, we need that. We need you. And so, Lord, I don't know every story in this room right now, but I would imagine that there are people in this room who are battling heavy things. God, in this moment, I pray that you would give them rest, that you would help them to seek you. And when they seek you, God, that you would give them your goodness and your faithfulness and the rest that you long to give them. Lord, may they find shelter in you. Father, I pray that they would today be willing to say, Jesus, I've been trying this my way and it's not working. I'm going to try it your way now. Lord, when they do, would you respond? Lord, would you show up? Would you give them eyes to see you in the midst of the storm? To know that no matter how hard it seems, no matter how dark it gets, that you are still good and you are still faithful and you are still on the throne. So Lord, we thank you for that. Lord, we praise you because we know you are the one worthy of praise. And we lift all that to you right now. Jesus, we pray it in your name. Amen.